Hello, I'm Ann Sansom from the poetry business, Smith Doorstop Books. Thank you for coming to the launch of Ian McMillan's latest collection, this very lovely pamphlet called Yes, but what is this? What exactly? Which is intriguing. I can tell you that signed copies will be available from the Book Vault, Market Street, Barnsley, and you can also email them. All the links for that will be on your Eventbrite's invitation. Ian will be taking questions. So if you think of any interesting questions, you can just send them into the YouTube chat. He will also be using his psychic powers to work out what kind of questions you might want to ask without you asking them, but do send them in as well. So I'm now very happy to introduce Ian McMillan with his new poems.
Thank you very much, Anne. Here we are in my bookline study. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming along to this virtual launch of Yes, but what is this? What exactly? Which I just realised is a kind of hostage to fortune if you want to buy it in a shop, where you go, can I have, yes, but what is this? What exactly? And they go, yes, but what is it? What exactly? Go, yes, but what is this? What exactly? So I'm going to read a few poems from the new pamphlet, and then we will be taking questions. As Anne said, some people can send in questions, otherwise I'll be using telepathy. And towards the end of the launch, I'm going to give you all some homework that you have to do, because of course, poetry is not a cruise ship. There are no passengers. We all have to take part. We're all on deck. The book is kind of odd in that it was all written before the pandemic. I would think the last poem in here was written maybe in early March. A lot of them were written towards the end of 2019. So we had no idea what was going to happen. And I know that there will be lots of poems, quite a few by me, about the last 9 months and the last year and the next year. But that makes this book a bit odd in that it's about a time that now feels like the very, very distant past. If you think back to 2019, when I was writing most of these, it just feels like they're kind of cave paintings on a Barnsley wall. So when I read them, they do feel like they're from history, but that's all right. So the first poem in the book is called Tone Found in Sonnet, a Murder Mystery. I was just writing down some words like I often do if I'm starting something off, if I'm tweeting or writing a poem. I start off by just writing down a few words. And I wrote down the word sonnet because I thought I fancied writing a sonnet. And then I noticed that if you messed about with the letters of the word sonnet, the word tone appeared. And then I thought, somebody had told me ages ago that the word horse is an anagram of the word shore. And I thought, what about all those ideas where you can actually have a word hidden in another word? And I thought, yes, that's a kind of mystery. It's a mystery. So this poem becomes a kind of mystery. And I thought it could be a murder mystery. It's like a murder mystery novel, this, in a way. So some of the lines have got actual words found in other words. Some of the lines are just things that you might find in a murder mystery, I guess. And the further down it I got, I let it take over. And it got more mysterious for me, which is a good thing. So it's called Tone Found in Sonnet, a Murder Mystery, set out in 4-line stanzas. I've become, as I get older, a big fan of the 4-line stanza. I love them. 3-liners as well, but 4-liners definitely. Tone found in sonnet, a murder mystery. Body found in suit. Horse found in shore. Hope found in hoopoe. Man found in woman. Foot found in sock. Bats found in stab. Wig found in wigwam. Man found in Manchester. Head found in hat. Rooters found in trousers. Beast found in breast. Man found in God Manchester. Ache found in heart. Man found in Manitoba. And what that did was, it took me around the globe. As soon as I thought of that word man, I thought Manchester, God Manchester. I've been to many places in my life, never been to God Manchester. Manitoba. Worth a try when you're writing poems, just to write down this word, find out the kind of anagrams, but also the kind of ghosts and signals that these poems, these words have in them somewhere. So it's a kind of unusual poem to start the collection off, but it sets the tone in a way. Another poem from the book is called Between Junction 35A and Junction 36. If you're on the M1, that's the ones as you're going up from Meadowhall towards Barnsley South, as they call it, is Junction 36. And what had happened was I had missed a train, so I had to get a taxi up between 35A and 36. And suddenly, as we're driving along, a truck pulled up and a load of people, the back door of the truck opened and a load of people ran off. And it felt to me like they were asylum seekers or people trying to find shelter in this country and trying to find shelter in this part of South Yorkshire. But they'd just been released and they ran off. They ran off towards, ironically, the place that Barry Hines' film of Kes was set with, that big ruined place where he finds the kestrel. And I thought, that's interesting. So this is one of those poems where something happens, and as it happens, this happens to a lot of us, doesn't it? As it happens, you think, oh, I'll write a poem about that. And then just the actual saying of those words to yourself starts the poem off. If you go, well, I'll write a poem about that, then a little machine starts in your head and a bit of ticker tape in a way, and the ticker tape comes out weeks, months later, but just the act, I believe, of saying, I'll write a poem about that, starts the poem to bubble somewhere. So between Junction 35A and Junction 36, the truck pulled up on the hard shoulder and a curtain at the back opened theatrically and they tumbled out, running into the evening scribbled bushes like scattered chess pieces, verbs cut from random magazines, pepper ground onto cold soup, marbles rolling across your grandma's yard, billiard balls rushing somewhere over the bays. Even the bushes were frightening in a language nobody knew. So the first part of the poem describes the actual event, you know, the back door opens, the curtains open on the truck theatrically, and then these people run out. But then there's a little list of what these running people might have looked like, which really is meant to set up, I don't know, a false sense of security and familiarity, and just to kind of, oh, it's Ian McMillan giving us a few lists of things. So scattered chess pieces, pepper ground onto cold soup, you know, you're giving people images for what's happening there. But then at the end, I wanted him to realise that as a reader, and what I realised as well was these people are running out into these bushes. And at that moment, the bushes are frightening. The bushes, you don't know where you are. You're in some bushes at the side of a busy road. You don't know where you are. You don't know where you're going to go. And it felt to me that the birds might have been singing in the bushes in a language nobody knew. So that's why it ends here. Even the bushes were frightening. Even the bushes were frightening in a language nobody knew. So nobody knew. So these human beings thrown out of this van ended up in these bushes, surrounded by birds tweeting in a language they couldn't understand. And maybe, I don't know, coppers might have ended up running after them, shouting in a language nobody understood. So I wanted it to go from kind of reportage to familiarity to deep unfamiliarity. Then there's a poem called A Financial Crisis in 3 parts. Because the book was written before the start of the pandemic, there's a lot of sort of political stuff around the things we were thinking about in our innocent 2019 as we kind of rolled along towards the 2019 election and the idea of Brexit. And I was thinking back to the financial crisis, and as I often do, I think about, and I thought what a dislocating thing the financial crisis of 2008 was. So this is just little tiny things. I think it's because I tweet such a lot. I've started writing these little tiny poems. Sometimes they start off as tweets, but they end up being these little tiny things. So, and I do like numbering. Fellow poets who are watching will know the power of numbering something, and just the act of kind of reading out the number when you read out the actual poem. So a financial crisis in 3 parts. 1, they smile before they start the waterboarding, and so do we. 2, I suddenly found I lived in this house, but I didn't know how I did it. The instruction book, I need the instruction book. 3, he felt an almost overwhelming urge to eat pound coins. there's a lot happening in those few lines, he said modestly, but there is, I think there is. I mean, they smile before they start the waterboarding. I always had that image of, you know, torturers actually smiling at you. And because you can't help smiling back at somebody, maybe there'll be that moment of shared smiling. And then I suddenly found I lived in this house, but didn't know how I did it. With the idea of you end up somewhere, like I've lived in this house for 35 years. And you think, how have I ended up here? And a lot of us thought about that in the financial crisis. How did we end up in this place at this time? And there's no instruction book. And then at the end, he felt an almost overwhelming urge to eat pound coins. We got some of those chocolate pounds left over from Christmas. And I remember thinking, they look like gold. I should eat them. I should eat these pound coins, and somehow I'll be rich again if you eat a lot of pound coins. And it reminded me of a poem I wrote years ago, where they discovered that they used to have, on the Isle of Man, they used to have cardboard money. And he said in a footnote, not much of this money survives. I thought, well, it wouldn't. And you think, well, maybe we could all have pound coins made out of chocolate. Maybe that would have solved the financial crisis. I don't know. I'm babbling here. Anyway, the book is available at the wonderful Book Vault in Barnsley. Barnsley's got an independent bookshop, which is great. The Book Vault, it's on Market Street. Pop in. They're great. I always describe them as like Amazon with conversation. Because yes, you can order books from Amazon, but you can go down to the Book Vault, you can buy a book, you can order a book, the book arrives, you go and talk to them about it. I've got loads of books that I've ordered from them. And when it first opened, I popped in and I was stood there and a fella came in with a book token. And he said, and he greeted me warmly. Hello, Ian. He was like, he was my old mate, although I'd never seen him before. Hello. And then he got a book token out. And in my kind of stupidity, I thought he was going to buy one of my books. So I'm stood there hovering with a pen ready to sign the book. And of course, he's not buying one of my books. And Keith, who runs the bookshop, took me upstairs, and it used to be a cake shop, this bookshop. Two greatest things in the world, books and cake. And he showed me around, and they've got fantastic plans for this bookshop. But when I went in, they were just moving in. It was just starting. It's a great sense of promise in this bookshop. Most definitely. So it's called In the Bookshop, a poem in that all plain style. I just called it that because I love that phrase, that all plain style. OL, that all plain. I just saw a piece of sheet music, and it said a song in that all plain style. So this is it. In the Bookshop, a poem in that all plain style. A man spends his book tokens on a book that isn't one of mine. The bookshop owner shows me how the upstairs is a wilderness that used to be a cake shop. We've got plans, reading groups, poetry sessions. There's a settee, wreathed in dust, a chair reduced to kit form. We need bookshops, I say. I'm glad you're here. Downstairs, the man is clutching military history to his heart. He catches my eye and walks over by the fiction. Would you mind? I wrote these when I was emotional and printed them myself. He passes me his book. I ask him to sign it, but he already has. One of the joys, you'll know, a lot of you watching this will know that meeting other poets, and they've often got their book of poems with them, which is great. This fella had. He'd written his poems. He said that wonderful phrase, I wrote these when I was emotional. What a fantastic phrase. And he printed, self-published this book, and he'd given it to me. He gave me this book. And I think I get given books all the time by people and poems. And it's a fantastic moment of it's a sacred moment, I think, almost. When they go, here's this book. And they gave me this book. And I asked him to sign it, but he already had. He kind of somehow, but he didn't know I was going to be in the shop. He said to Ian McMillan, all the best. So I think he'd been kind of wandering around Barnsley, hoping to bump into me. And where better to bump into a poet than a bookshop? And what that poem is just saying, let's all go to bookshops, but also let's be full of joy when people give us their poems. Although I've got to say, I mean, like a lot of people, I say everybody can write poems, and I want everybody to write poems. But then, when do we get the time to read them? That's the other question. Look at my bookshelves. Behind me on here, there's piles of books that I have to read from my Radio 3 show, but also that I bought, that people have sent me. And I want to give them all the same weight of attention. But there's only so many hours in the day. I do get up very early. I read, I go to bed a bit later than I should. I read, but there's always more books coming in. So it's an interesting problem. If everybody's going to write poems, which they are, then we need to find time to read them, and we need to find time to read them with great seriousness, I think. So there you go. I'm enjoying this, by the way. I hope you are. It's great to sit in a room and read poems. It's fantastic. I've got a map of the world behind me on my study, as I call it, wall, partly because I was embarrassed that somebody would mention a country and I couldn't instantly pinpoint it on a map. And I felt embarrassed about that. I'm 64 years old. I should know where these countries are. So I stuck a map of the world on my wall, which both makes me feel big because I'm part of the world and tiny because I'm part of the world. And it also encourages me to read more poems in translation and try to learn other languages so I can read poems from all over the world. Here's me saying, there's books all over the place. I want more. Anyway, this is a poem called Adult Audio. Don't forget, you can send questions in, by the way, during this live event. I'm going to just look every now and then on my WhatsApp, and I'd say, WhatsApp with you, and it'll tell me if we've got some questions. I'll add the question. Right. So I'm going to answer that question in a moment, the question that we've just got. But first of all, I'll read this poem. So this is about my mother-in-law, who is a wonderful woman, makes fantastic egg custards, crumbles. Before all this coronavirus, on Sundays, the entire family would go down to her house and we'd have the most amazing teas. And this is, we're all at the house. Two of my grandkids from separate families, so can't meet now, were sitting there watching telly. And so there's Isla and there's Noah, and they're sitting watching telly. Just briefly for a minute, you know, they've sat down. They're very, very ebullient children, which is great. But she sits them down and they want to watch CBBC. My mother-in-law always calls the channels by their numbers. She says, oh, I was watching the snooker, it was on 26. Then they had Bonanza, that was on 91. So she didn't know the number for CBBC, on the name of it, but when I told her she knew the number, then she kept saying CBBC. She had her glasses off, which is important for the poem. So it's called Adult Audio. I promise there's no adultness in it. My mother-in-law gathers two of my grandchildren around her tiny television. Well, that's the other thing to say about my mother-in-law's television. It's about as big as the iPad that I'm looking at now. My mother-in-law gathers two of my grandchildren around her tiny television, like she's gathering peas that have been shelled. Yes, I've got CBBC, she says. From a cabinet, bearded me gazes down from my wedding snap. That knife I'm holding is sharp, that cake. My mother-in-law presses a button on the remote, or should I say, I meant to say, she presses the wrong button on the remote. Right remote, wrong button, and audio comes on. The word audio, loud across the screen. The grandchildren sit like chess pieces. Adult, my mother-in-law shouts, adult, I've switched on, adult. How slippery words are. How they cut like knives cut wedding cakes. The shipping forecast calms its way out of the screen on Radio 4, the adult shipping forecast, obviously. All those wet places. It's a bit adult at the end. What it was, as you know, if you can listen to the radio and you tell it, the word audio comes up. My mother-in-law thought it said adult. So I put adult on. So again, poets in the crowd will know that's a gift. When somebody says something like that, you think, well, just store it away. It'll come back. Got a couple of questions on WhatsApp. Great, aren't we? 21st century here, people of the poetry business. It's a question from Lucienne Cummings. Did any of these poems come out of your daily strolls? Yes, one or two of them did. I'll tell you, let me see if I can find which one. Because every morning, people don't know, every morning I get up about 5 o'clock and I go for a walk. I've started going about 5:20, go for a walk around the village where I live, and it's always the same walk. And I always try and see at least 5 new things on the walk, and then I tweet about them. And it gets your brain going. You have to keep your brain topped up. So the walking helps me. You know, the physical action of walking is good, but also it keeps you going. So there was one or two. There's one here, Lucienne. I snap my fingers at time like it's a waiter approaching with soup. And I remember thinking of that on an early stroll. And Paul Davidson, a similar question in a way. has your prolific tweeting affected how you write? Yes, it has. I mean, I was a bit nervous. I was introduced to Twitter by my producer on The Verb, Jessica Treen, who said, if you just tweet about once a week, just tell them what's happening on The Verb. And suddenly I thought, this is great. You know, when I started off, you have about 10 followers and you think, wow, there's 10 people. It's like publishing a little thing. And I started using it for images, for lines that occur to me, for like that thing about the horse being an anagram of shore. I remember writing ashore, my anagram for a horse, which is just, they're nothing else but tweets. So it has affected the way I write, but not in the way I thought it would. I thought it might slow me down or fill up the writing bit of me so I couldn't write anything else. But it's been the opposite, to be honest. I find tweeting a great dam burster for getting me thinking of ideas, for forcing me to think of ideas, for forcing me to pound my brain and think of new things. So yes, my prolific tweeting has affected it in a good way. I think it really has. It's made me, it just means that all the time you're kind of available for language. I'd recommend tweeting. I mean, Twitter can be a cesspit, but I try and keep it light and jolly and happy. You know, it's may I recommend a man called Moose Allain on Twitter, one of the great tweeters. He's a cartoonist and an artist, and his tweets are beautiful little pieces of whimsy, if you like. I don't like that word. For example, he did one that went, I made a scale model of Everest. No, that's wrong. I got that totally wrong. Did the gag wrong. I made a model of Everest. Was it to scale? No, just to look at. Things like that, just a gag, you know, but it works on Twitter. So yes, that's right. Great getting questions on WhatsApp. Wow, it's like being interrogated by the cyber police, although you're nice cyber police. Let me read you another poem. This again is kind of set at my mother-in-law's house because my father-in-law died many years ago. And still at the bottom of the stairs, when I go to her house, there are 3 of his flat caps hung up at the bottom of the stairs. And it's a very kind of poignant thing, you know, that she didn't want to get rid of them, that there they are. And he went down the pit, you know, the Open Main, which I can see from my window, what was there before. It's now the ASOS warehouse. You can see the hill where Open Main pit stack was. The mining industry was a terrible thing that in that way, physically, it did his lungs in. And so this is just, it's about him, it's about the flat caps, and it's about, well, I'll let you read it. I won't let you read it, I'll read it, I'll let you listen to it. It's called Three Flat Caps at the Bottom of the Stairs. It's got a bit of strong language in it. It's got the word bastard, but it's all right because we're past the 7 o'clock threshold. We'll be fine. The mining industry, eh? What a bastard. Men dropped at the speed of dropped kecks down a hole in the ground to land lamplit and gasping. And now, what's left to ponder? Just 3 flat caps at the bottom of the stairs. Still there. Years and years after he died. Notice this. Saying years and years piles them up. Piles years on years, like the coal the wagons used to pile outside the house. Take one of the flat caps and listen carefully. He's breathing, like fingernails across wire mesh, like rain on the bratish roof of a shed. Still there, in that space behind the neb. Don't ever put it on. Don't let the grandkids put it on. This is as important a cultural artifact as that statue of Churchill, or the Queen's head you lick the back of every time you send a card to a grieving widow. Kind of anger in that poem, you know, about the way people's lives were destroyed by the mine industry, and yet it created a kind of community that has completely gone. And I do believe these flat caps are as important as statues of Churchill. But then that's just my personal view, of course. We've got another question in. This is great. The thing is, tragically, I've got to sign in to my phone again. 64-year-old man. Here we go. Ms. Hunt asks, which poets influenced you in early years? Well, I would say more than poetry, song influenced me in the very early years. My dad, I've written about my dad a lot. He sang all the time. He sang Donald, Where's Your Trousers? He sang Puppet on a String. He sang Red River Valley. Da, 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 to the Red River Valley. And the idea that words could somehow have their own music has really become part of how I think. So it was that, I would say. at school we wrote a lot of poems, and you weren't reading particular poets at the time at junior school, I don't think. Nursery rhymes, that kind of thing. At secondary school, the poets that influenced me in my years at secondary school, we had an anthology called 9 Modern Poets, and it had people in it like Philip Larkin. It's amazing now. I think there were 9 poets in it. They were all white men. That's amazing, isn't it? That's amazing. I mean, but the poets were people like Iris Thomas, Philip Larkin, Dylan Thomas, Ted Hughes, John Betjeman. That's 5 of them. I remember being particularly attracted to Iris Thomas and Ted Hughes. When you found that Ted Hughes came from Mexborough, or came from Mythenroyd, but lived in Mexborough, and Mexborough was what made him a poet, you thought, wow, here's a poet from not far from me. And that was interesting. That influenced me. The idea that somebody who lived in Mexborough, whose mum and dad ran a paper shop in Mexborough, could be a poet. You think, well, that makes you think about being a poet. And then, as I got older, I still stayed with Dylan Thomas. Maybe Dylan Thomas is a bad person to have influence you when you're about 15 because of his huge word rush, and his word drunkenness, the way that he wants to pile every word on, and it takes you years to get away, in a sense, from Dylan Thomas. And maybe I haven't, in the way that I like words to tumble along. So Dylan Thomas was a huge influence, and he led me on, I think, to W.S. Graham. I'm still a huge W.S. Graham fan. Where's the book? I can't find it now. I've got the W.S. Graham collected. Here we are. This is it, is it? Yeah. W.S. Graham, New Collected Poems. Wow, such fantastic things. Implements in Their Places. If you don't know that one, that's a fantastic W.S. Graham book. And he's a bit like Dylan Thomas. He's one of these new apocalyptics. So those people influenced me. But I've always wanted to read poems all the time, but then go back to people. That's a fact, actually. You go back to people. So you go back to W.S. Graham. And the older you get, the 15-year-old me would read Dylan Thomas in a certain way, and the 64-year-old me will read Dylan Thomas in a different way. And that's the exciting thing about it. So I would say, always read new poets. I mean, I'm reading new poets all the time. We're in a fantastic time at the moment for new poets. Some great presses about, as we know, the Poetry Business, of course, fantastic press, but other presses, like Broken Sleep Press, Bad Betty Press, some fantastic presses around, publishing fantastic work, which you hope will go on to influence other poets. I don't know. Hey, these are great questions. Another question here. Bob Dunning. I remember you were using poetry to work with people with dementia. Do you still do this? Yes, Bob, I do. I work with a fantastic community art group in Doncaster called DARTS, Doncaster Community Arts. And when we were still able to meet at our building up in Doncaster, we had these fantastic sessions where we'd sit around with people with memory loss and dementia and Alzheimer's, and we'd have a musician, and I'd be there with my flip chart, my weapon of choice, the flip chart, and we just make things up. And of course, the people making the piece up might not remember it when they leave the room, but at the moment they're making it up, they know it. And I find that so moving, so exciting. So we did a session, and there was an older lady there, and there was a bit of laughter in the corner, and she found that a bit disconcerting, and she went, I thought this was going to be a friendly meeting. They don't even give you a biscuit, she said. I thought this was going to be a friendly meeting. They don't even give you a biscuit. I thought, wow, that's a point. So we wrote this thing. Then we sang this song about it was going to be a friendly biscuit. So yes, I do still work with people. We're not able to do it at the moment because it's difficult to get Zoom working going and all that. But I think once we're able to get back in amongst them, then yeah, definitely we'll carry on. I'm going to read a poem. Then we've got even more questions coming in. This is great. Oh yeah, I'll read another poem. Let's have a look. It's great this is the first time I've read from this book, by the way, because of course we haven't got any chance to do it, but it's the first time I've done it. So it's nice to be able to just look through your book and start. This was about the 2019 election. When we're all sitting there going, oh, perhaps it'll be a hung parliament. Perhaps Boris Johnson might get a one seat majority. And as I'm walking down to vote, there's this woman with one of them dogs on a lead that he stretched all the way to Rotherham, this dog lead, massive. This is called The News. And when you get the news, you think, is it going to be a headline? And finally, a man in Yorkshire sits and writes a poem, one of them. So it's called The News. And it's just, again, one of those poems where something happens to you. And that's what Frank O'Hara always did, didn't it? Something happens, I'll write a poem about this, let the machine begin to click. The News. Headline or, and finally, you decide. Go on, decide. You decide. As I walk past the woman with the white dog on a lead, somehow I get tangled in the lead, one of those long ones that stretch to Doncaster. I step over or try, and she lifts the lead, and I trip, and then I regain my balance. I grab a fence, and she pulls the lead, and the dog tries to nick my trousers. I try to step over again, and she lifts the lead high over my head, but not high enough, so I bend and crick my neck and try to step over the lead again and fail. We stand still and still. The dog says, "Who's voting Tory on Thursday?" I know I am. The lead is long, so long. It can't have been election day. It must have been the day before. But it just struck me as, I don't know, it was one of those things where I was genuinely tied up in this dog's lead. And it's like when you're tied up in hope, you know, you think, well, I'm hoping things are going to happen, and you're tied up and you think, well, and then this dog, I don't know why, to be honest, listeners, viewers, I don't know where the talking dog came from. I've been thinking about that thing. There's a kind of meme, isn't there, on the internet, dogs at polling stations. And I know my son was going to take his dog to a polling station. And I thought, well, what if give dogs the vote, and then that just popped in. And we should allow that to happen. When things pop in, I think we should celebrate them, I think. Oh, all these questions, this is great. You're able to balance seriousness, strangeness, and humour in your poems in a way that's very effective. Can you talk a bit about how that happens? Well, it's hard to say. There's always been two of me. There's always been the fella who wants to make people laugh. And I've always liked making people laugh. And that's just a thing. Some people laugh at things I say, some people don't. Don't bother me, but I like making people laugh. And it's a kind of disease, make people laugh. And that's partly because over the years, I've been sent as a poet into places where you think you should have a go at making people laugh. On the other hand, I'm quite a serious person, I think seriously. And I've always been interested in that meeting of those two things, of the seriousness, the obscurity. I love obscure and difficult poems. I love it when I can sit there for hours trying to work something out. I like that. And I'm always trying to think of a way of marrying the obscure and the difficult with the populous, whatever it is, making people smile, making people laugh. And the odd, the other part of the question is strangeness. So it's seriousness, strangeness, and humour. The strangeness, I think the strangeness is just about going back to the tweeting, actually, going back to the early strolls and the noticing. I think you just notice things and they become strange by noticing them. You just see things and they become odd. It's what the great poet Elizabeth Bishop called the always more successful surrealism of everyday life, the always more successful surrealism of everyday life. You see things, they just become surreal. And if you write them down, it's a thing that it's an obvious trope in a way, isn't it? It's things like Alan Bennett does it. Just see something, writes down what they say, and it becomes strange. And then that gives you license to play with it. And that's why I had the talking dog in the previous poem. You can be strange. And strangeness does make the reader or the listener or the viewer go, I get that. Yeah, I see. Another question here. Northern Jim. Which poets do you admire most out of your contemporaries? Ooh, that's a hard one, Northern Jim. Oh, you see, you don't want to set people up against each other. You really don't. But recently, who have I been reading recently? I'll tell you who I've been reading recently that I've really been enjoying. Let me get the book. Where's it gone? See, they've got such a pile of books here. Such a vast pile of books. Who have I been reading? See, I read so many. I'll tell you what I've been reading recently that I've been getting into. Where's he gone? And he's not a contemporary, but he is. And he's the one through whom everything gets filtered. And it's John Ashbery. John Ashbery. Big fan of John Ashbery. And John Ashbery is kind of the I didn't mention him in my early influences because he's a kind of late influence, but he's the one through which I read everybody. I think I read everybody through John Ashbery. Tell you what I like at the moment, Rachel Allen's writing some fantastic stuff. Rachel Allen is writing some really interesting work. She's got a new book coming out. Helen Mort, I like reading Helen Mort. I think Helen's a fantastic poet. Trying to think who else. Who's this? I'm going to go off screen briefly just to get this book out that I'm just going to show you in a minute. Yep. Haven't gone. I'm still here. Here's a couple that I like. Wayne Holloway Smith. This is such a great book from Blood Axe. Really, really interesting book about maleness, about masculinity, about being somebody trying to live in the 21st century. I do like that. And I also like Phoebe Stooks. I like Phoebe Stooks. Book called Platinum Blonde from Blood Axe. Very, very interesting work, again, about growing up, about the young poets, they're younger, and they're about growing up in the 21st century in Britain, but also taking in influences from all over the world. So there too, but ask me tomorrow, I'll mention more, because like I said, I just keep reading stuff all the time. Question from Ian Indent. Ian Indent. That's not your name. You're actually Ian, and you're Indent. Do you know any of you know lots of your poems by heart? I don't know any of my poems by heart. My mate Luke, the musician, can't believe that. What, you don't know? So when me and Luke are performing together, I always have to have my little book. And you think some of the poems you've performed a lot, you think you would know them, but there's something about, I don't know, there's something about having the book there. Some of the performance ones actually you probably do, but most of them you don't. I admire people who can do their poems by heart, but I can't. Musicians, of course, will learn songs, but I find that even if Luke and I have written a piece that's mainly song and has just got a bit of spoken word in it, I still have to read it from a bit of paper. He finds it really embarrassing. I quite like it, to be honest. Perhaps I should. Perhaps, again, good for the brain to try and learn a poem. Maybe it would, I don't know. These are great questions. Question from Mr. Jonathan Davidson, and he says, how many of your poems have been translated? I can tell you exactly how many, Jonathan. None. As far as I know, there's never been a collection of my poems in translation. It's a shame. I mean, I'd like it. I would love it. I keep talking like Kevin Keegan. I'd love it if people could translate my poems. I read a lot of people like Philippe Jacotet, and I love French poetry, and French poetry in translation is very different to the kind of stuff I write, but I'd love it. If anybody out there would like to take on the challenge of translating my poems, I would love that. And I like the idea of translation, just been reading Bill Herbert's fantastic new book, The Wreck of the Fathership. And a lot of that is about the act of translation and the act of the way that translation meets you halfway. I would love to have a go at translating someone. I would love it if somebody would have a go at translating some of mine, but as far as I know, it's not happened yet. Do I write in formal forms? Leslie Ingram says, yes, I do. I've been lucky enough to be Barnsley Council's poet in lockdown since April, since the lockdown happened. And they said, could you write us some poems? And I thought, I'll have a go at a sonnet, because I do like sonnets. I think the sonnet is an infinitely malleable form that you can do all sorts of things with. And so I started writing sonnets. I was doing 2 a week at the start of the lockdown. And that was interesting. I love a deadline. I love the way it forces you to do things. So I was writing these sonnets. They were mainly Shakespearean sonnets, and sometimes they were Petrarchan sonnets. And what I liked about them was, as Don Patterson says, the rhyme forces you to think of stuff you wouldn't have thought of anyway, which is great. It hands you lines that you would never have occurred to you. I tried to make them 10 syllables a line, sticking with the strict rhyme form. You don't have to with a sonnet, but I was. And I found it both liberating and kind of like I was in a sonnet cage, but it was a sort of gilded cage. It was a cage with beautiful gold bars in it. So yeah, I do write. They've asked me now to become, you can't see it, there's a thing on me wardrobe here that's just reminding me that I've got to write a sonnet a month. And what's happened is we encourage people to write their own sonnets, and we got loads of sonnets in. There's been a kind of sonnet madness taken over Barnsley. A guy I know called Ken Brooks, who was a guy, I think he's about 80 years old, and he very cultured chap, but doesn't write a lot of poems. And he's suddenly become like the king of sonnets. And he'll say, Ian, lad, I've written 3 today. You know, I thought that's not very many. So yes, I do write in formal forms. I do like them. I've yet to write a fantastic. I want to have a go at writing a villanelle that's like a proper villanelle sometime. You know, I will have a go at that. I don't know, there's something about a villanelle. I like reading them, but writing them I'm not so good at. But maybe I will sometime. These are questions. Do you read / perform poetry to your grandchildren? Well, I sometimes will make up daft poems with them. I will, like this afternoon, because it's the last time, because we're now in tier 3, that Noah could come to the garden. Noah came and we made up a story. We made up a story together that had a lot of rhythm and a lot of rhyme. We were running up and down the garden. You know, I said, tell that story again. Tell another story. Tell another one. When my kids, who are now in their 30s, were little, I used to write them a poem every day and put it in the lunchbox when they were at junior school. And when my eldest went to secondary school, she went, Dad, never put a poem in our lunchbox again. And so I never did. But I think that they're kind of used to the fact they've got a dad who was a poet and a granddad who was a poet or whatever. But I do like making stories up with them. And they're kind of a demanding audience. Can you make another one up, Granddad, but make it better than the last one? That's fantastic. That's the kind of audience you want. That's like getting a bad review in the TLS, is it? I don't know. Anyway, I'll read another poem now from the book. This is great. In a sense, you don't really mind if there's nobody there. You know what I mean? It's just keep talking. When I'm on the train, happy days. I was thinking, I used to hate getting on a train that was packed out with people and you couldn't sit down. And gosh, I missed that. I've just started going back to Salford to do the Verb, my Radio 3 show, and the trains are empty. And I was on the 5:18 p.m. the other day, which was normally standing room only, if you're lucky. And there was hardly anybody on. And I thought, God, I missed that. But what I like to do when I'm on a train is 2 things. I like to look out the window and see a ball bowled at a cricket match that you pass and a goal scored at a football match. You see fewer football matches, you see quite a lot of cricket matches. And I was going up, where was it? There was a football pitch. I was going up to Durham somewhere and I saw a goal scored. And I was, because the train slowed down, they scored a goal. And I kind of went, yes. And so it's about that. And I think this is influenced by Adelstrop, the great Edward Thomas poem, Adelstrop, but also by that Roger McGough poem called Waving at Trains, when, you know, if you wave from your train, by the time you've waved, you've passed them. So this is called Seeing a Goal Scored from a Passing Train. It was published in that wonderful magazine called Nutmeg. If you're into football and poetry, there's a great magazine called Nutmeg, the magazine of Scottish football writing. Where's it gone? They've just done an amazing book, Snapshot, which is a book of photographs and wonderfully poetic prose by a guy called Daniel Gray, who's a great prose stylist, I think. I've lost Nutmeg. If you're into sports writing, I can recommend The Night Watchman, which is a fantastic cricket magazine. All these magazines and books. Whew. Anyway, Seen a Goal Scored from a Passing Train. The train slows, almost stops. Drizzle's stories are stale and repetitious, and the traveller wipes a hole in the window steam with his sleeve. A goal is a brief moment of clarity, a punctuation mark in a game's long sentence. A match is happening on a soggily diluted field. Men and boys run through sludge to get, well, where? To the future celebration. Obvs. A goal is a point of sudden change, a new route found on an old map. A bloke who looks like he's made of mud boots the ball so hard that the very air it travels through, almost breaks. A goal is a memory you always knew you'd have even before the goal was scored. The keeper flaps like a scarf in a breeze, wafts nothing except the ball's ghost, and the striker runs away, mouth open in joy. The goal is always the goal of the game and the goal of the season until the next goal. I stand and whoop, and the train's dullards stare at me like I'm a cave painting come to life. I don't care. It's a goal. The train creaks, moves. I always wanted to get the word obvs, like for obviously, in a poem. So I thought, put it in. That's the other great thing about poems, isn't it? You can do what you want. You can do what you want. Put what you want in. It's my advice. Put what you want in. I'm going to read a couple more poems. Then I'm going to set your homework. You can send in your homework to the Poetry Business if you could. And if they want, they can send them to me and I'll read them. Oh, Another question from Ms. Hunt. Are there any topics you avoid or don't like to write about? I don't know. I hadn't thought about that much. I don't think there are really. I'm not very good at nature poetry. I would find that hard. There's a huge movement of nature writing, and that's great. I like nature writing. I like reading it. I like reading people like Harriet Tarlow, Colin Sims, fantastic writers. But I don't think I could do that myself. So I don't avoid nature. It kind of avoids me in terms of writing about it. I do like nature. I'm a big fan of nature, but I don't know. I think I would end up either writing descriptive stuff that was a bit lame, or I'd assume that the nature was there to give me some kind of threadbare metaphor, which I don't really need. One of my favorite books of nature writing is this one, Artisan, by the fantastic John Bevis, who is a great poet. And this book is just annotations of birdsong. It's fantastic. And just gives you just the words, just trying to articulate their song. So you've got zik, which is the Arctic warbler, zee, the blackpoll warbler, zik, the least tern. That's all it is. If I couldn't write anything like that, there's no point in me actually having a go at writing nature poetry. I don't think. I'm sure there isn't. Anyway, as I say, here we've got another question. God, these questions are great, everybody. I really like your questions. I'm going to read a couple more poems, then I'm going to set your homework. All right, I'll read a poem, a couple of questions, one more poem, homework. All right. This is called Lighthouses. And I was reminded of it when the Conservatives didn't vote for free school meals. And you think, oh, that was an easy win for them, to be honest. They could have gone, yeah, we'll do it, but they didn't. And so I thought, well, they could have this. I imagined a group of MPs going, let's just let the homeless live in lighthouses because they don't need lighthouses anymore. And once you think of that idea, it just kind of goes from there. Lighthouses. That's what he said in the interview. Let them live in lighthouses. After all, we have no use for lighthouses anymore. So rather than having them litter the coast, let the homeless live in them. And then, chuckle in the voice, when the light comes on, it will seem, giggle in the voice, like they have had a bright idea. Storms are the worst times. The lighthouses shake and tremble. Sometimes they blow away. Too light, you see, too sob in the voice, light. That chuckle in the voice thing, when I was recording a voiceover one, somebody said, can you put a bit of chuckle in your voice? You have to go like that. And I imagined this politician saying, yeah, they could live in these, and just, I don't know, the way that sometimes they're saying these awful things, where you think, gosh, I tweeted about it. I thought, when you hear stuff like that, the language itself revolts at having to be used as a vehicle for this stuff. So that was that one. I'm going to have to log on to my phone again to answer these questions. Here we go. Look. Ahem. Paul Davidson. Hello, Paul. As you saw and know from being from Barnsley, do you see a different response to your writing in different parts of the country? Not really, Paul. No. I mean, people assume sometimes that you'll be either like the token northerner or that somehow your poems won't be as appreciated in Bexley Heath or Rhyme Intrinsica in Dorset as they are around here. I find that it's more or less the same reaction, to be honest with you. People fall asleep and snore in the same way. No, that's not true. But no, it's more or less the same, to be honest with you. To me, it's not the kind of macro geography, it's the micro geography. So by that I mean the room. The room determines the reaction, I think. A nice room set out well with an audience nice and close. That's the kind of geography you want. But no, honestly, I find everywhere I go, you'll get a range of reactions, but they're no different from north to south, I don't think. Stephen Whalen wants to know if there are any caves in Barnsley. You're right, Stephen, I mentioned cave paintings twice. And I just love the idea of cave paintings. And also, I've been reading Clayton Eshelman recently, who was big on cave paintings. There's a couple of old mine shafts that are like caves. And there's a sort of legendary cave not far from Wombwell Station, which is my local station, which is known as the Prisoner's Tunnel or the Thieves' Tunnel, which is a kind of cave. It's almost like a cave set into a wall. There aren't any caves, except, of course, the caves in our imagination. You know, we can have caves. Right, I'm going to read one more poem. Then I'm going to set you the homework. The homework is going to be set in a moment. This is about a volunteer at our local museum, the Maurice Dobson Memorial Heritage Centre and Museum in Darfield. I've talked a lot about Maurice, but Maurice was a gay cross-dressing ex-Marine, and him and his partner Fred ran this shop for years in the 40s and 50s and 60s in Darfield, Pit Village. And I've always used it as a kind of metaphor for people accepting other people. And, you know, it's a fantastic place. If you're around, come and see us. We're shut at the moment, but keep your eye on social media. Come and see us. We're open Saturdays and Wednesdays. And me and my wife volunteer there once a month. Then you'll see me in the cafe with a pinny on. And other clothing, of course, as well. And they had a Christmas tree. We have a Christmas tree every year. And this last year, Christmas 2019, it blew down. And the angel, weirdly, was kind of laid on the floor, like a crime scene. So it's just about that. It's called The Fallen Christmas Tree at the Museum. By the way, pens at the ready, because I'm going to set you homework very soon. The Fallen Christmas Tree at the Museum. Yes, you heard. It fell, even though Ewan Aubrey had fastened it up, shackled it to the wall. The lights lit up the floor. The baubles were, let's see, how can I put this? Bauble jigsaws, seasonal mosaics, and the angel just laid on the floor at an angle to the world and looked at the sky's starling jam blankly. Margaret came out and tried unsuccessfully to sell me a raffle ticket. She said, I won't write your name on the ticket because we all know who you are. Yes, Margaret, but does the angel, does the fallen angel know who I am? Should I ask? Is the angel a, what's his name? A thingy? A metaphor. That's it, a metaphor. And really that comes from that question earlier about mixing the strange with the serious, because it was quite strange that at the moment, not long after the Christmas tree had blown down, somebody came out to try and sell me a raffle ticket. And that happens to us all the time. And all you have to do is just write it down and say, here it is. This is what happened. This is what happened. And the writing it down makes it become strange, I think. Anyway, let me set you your homework. I was looking through my books, and this must be a book that I got from a second-hand bookshop. I've tweeted this before, but I found this fantastic shopping list on a piece of card that's been cut from a postcard of a sort of, looks like a cathedral, and there's a bit of a, I can't read, it's in German, so it's some kind of place in Germany. But I'm going to read you out the shopping list because it's almost too good to be true, this shopping list. What this person wants is camera spool, brackets 35mm 24 exposure, back scratcher, toilet rolls, white 2-ply, Dettol mould and mildew remover, green bottle. But then, gloriously, kippers is there and it's crossed out, and eardrops is crossed out. And the more I see that, the more I think it's kind of made up, but maybe it isn't. You know, he didn't want the kippers in the end, but he wanted the back scratcher. So we got the camera spool, the back scratcher, the toilet rolls, the Dettol mould and mildew remover, and the kippers. But the kippers are crossed out. So if you want to have a go and write a poem based on that, or not, that'd be fine. Thank you very much for coming along to this launch of my pamphlet. Yes, but what is this? What exactly? Published by the wonderful Poetry Business, Smith Doorstop Books. Do read and buy all their books because they're fantastic publishers. Thanks to the Book Vault in Barnsley for being our partner on this. I've signed a few books. You can go along and buy them there, but take your time in the bookshop as well because it's a fantastic bookshop. And in a moment, we're going to end this. And it's that awkward thing where you press a button and there's what they call your resting bitch face is still there. So hopefully that won't be. So I'm going to keep grinning like a turnip lamp. Seasonal reference there. I'm going to keep grinning like a turnip lamp as we leave. So thank you very much for listening to me the last hour. And don't forget your homework, the kippers, the back scratcher. We'll see you all again.